Van Halen played in the clubs for quite a while before Ted Templeman picked them up on Warner Brothers. Van Halen got signed by Warner Brothers Records in 1977. On February 10th, 1978, the record label Warner Brothers released Van Halen's first studio album, which went platinum the same year. Warner Brothers had the band booked to kick off a worldwide tour on March 3rd, 1978, just 3 weeks after the album was released. Van Halen played 124 shows in the United States, 2 in Canada, 39 in Europe, and 9 in Japan. At 174 shows total over a 10-month period, the tour was one of the band's most extensive overall. Throughout the tour, Van Halen was mostly a supporting act for Montrose, Journey, and Black Sabbath. However, Van Halen headlined shows in Europe and Japan. The album was a commercial success. You Really Got Me solidified their place on the radio, and the next thing you knew, they were selling out arenas. Van Halen's energetic live performances, innovative guitar work by Eddie Van Halen, and the charismatic presence of frontman David Lee Roth helped them rise to fame. And they should have been celebrating. But when the band came back from touring, they found that they owed their record label over $1 million. Eddie Van Halen said in an interview, "When we came home after 11 months of touring, Warner Brothers said, 'You owe us $3 million and a new album.' The band was shocked." Eddie went, "How does that work?" Of course, Van Halen were super talented, but if it wasn't for Warner Brothers, they were still playing backyard parties in clubs. So surely, Warner Brothers invested lots of money, maybe about $1 million, to promote the band on the radio and around the world. So, when Van Halen found out that instead of becoming millionaires, they had over $1 million in debt to the record label, they fired their manager and replaced him with trusted road manager Noel Monk. Actually, when Van Halen signed the contract with Warner Brothers, they were kids who didn't know how the music business works. Anyway, they struggled to get a record deal for a couple years. Gene Simmons from Kiss tried to produce Van Halen in 1976, but the Kiss manager, Bill Aucoin, turned them down. On February 2nd, 1977, Templeman witnessed a live performance by Van Halen at the Starwood Lounge in Hollywood and persuaded Warner Brothers chairman Mo Ostin that he should sign the band. Mo Ostin and Ted Templeman signed Van Halen to an inauspicious 2-album contract, one that heavily favored Warner Brothers, offering 70-cent per unit royalty. Manager Noel Monk, then an equal partner in band revenue, renegotiated this rate for double in 1979. So, Van Halen signed a very unprofitable contract with Warner Brothers, and they wanted to get out of it as soon as they could. As their manager, this is what Monk did. The terms Warner Brothers included in their initial deal with Van Halen said Warner had the option of renewing the same terms of the contract every 2 years for life. I flooded the record company with so many paper requests for royalties and accounting that they were sick of me and my people, Monk told Forbes in a 2017 interview. They were snowed with all the things I would throw at them, and somehow they did what I was hoping. They missed the option date to renew the contract. So, Monk met with Warner Brothers chairman Mo Ostin and informed him that Van Halen was now a free agent. Renegotiating the contract made the band members instant multimillionaires. Monk also talked the band into handling their own merchandising instead of going through a middleman. This brought them millions, doubling what they would have made otherwise. My father had been in the garment business, and I knew the basics, Noel Monk says. While other bands were getting 25 cents on the dollar for their t-shirts, 25%, we were getting 50 cents, 50%. By '82, we were grossing $250,000 in merchandise every single night. Kids wanted Van Halen posters, t-shirts, baseball caps. Why should we give the majority of that revenue stream to someone else? When Van Halen's second album was about to be released, An executive at Billboard asked them where he wanted the album to land on the charts, a favor that would be repaid by advertising. I was shocked, says Monk, but I had to think quick. I told him, well, if we were to start at 5 or 6, we have no place to go. Maybe we should do the low 40s. I had no idea this existed. And later, when the band's fourth album, Fair Warning, wasn't selling well, Monk found out that the payola system in radio was still alive and well. So here's a few words about payola. What is payola? Payola appeared in the U.S. in the early 50s. It is a term that refers to the practice of paying a radio station or DJ to play a certain song or artist. This is done to promote the song or artist and increase their popularity. Payola can take many forms, including cash payments, gifts, or other incentives. The practice of payola is illegal in many countries, including the United States, where it's considered a form of bribery. How does payola work? Payola works by offering incentives to radio or DJs to play a certain song or artist. This can be done in several ways, including cash payments, gifts, or other incentives. The goal is to get the song or artist played on the radio, which can increase their popularity and lead to more sales or streams. Payola can be difficult to detect, as it often takes place behind closed doors and is not disclosed to the public. So, Monk invested the band's money into paying to radio stations and helped them fourth album, Fair Warning, go platinum. Monk says, in top markets, a $5,000 payment would be needed to get more airplay. Monk estimated it would take a couple $100,000 to help make the album go platinum, which the group eventually approved, as he recalls David Lee Roth saying, "We can't afford to be just a gold band anymore." Monk also once searched through dumpsters for Warner Brothers' secret Black Book of Artist allocations, which detailed how much the record company was spending on each band. Monk negotiated the paycheck and got Van Halen $1.5 million for a single performance at 1983's US Festival. I was there, a great show. And then an additional $50,000 on top of that, since Monk had inserted a clause that no band could be paid more than Van Halen. And then, according to Monk, Van Halen got too greedy. Years ago as kids, playing in those Pasadena backyards, they agreed to be true partners, sharing all the income equally. Now, when they were getting millions from playing arenas and selling records, that arrangement no longer suited everyone. Fame, sex, alcohol, and drugs started tearing the band apart. Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth, who were the two most creative powers in the band, started to clash. In 1983, Eddie built his own home studio. It would allow him to dominate the recording process without as much input from Roth. Moreover, he began to experiment with keyboards and synthesizers, while Roth preferred guitar-heavy hard rock. As David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen wrote the band's songs and drummer Alex Van Halen had the protection of his brother, bass player Michael Anthony was the one to take the blow first. Anthony was a 20% member, manager Noel Monk being the fifth, of all debts and profits, including merchandise, until midway through the 1984 tour, when tensions rose to the point that Roth and the Van Halen brothers insisted that Anthony sign away all future songwriting, credit, and royalties, retroactive with the current 1984 album. Noel Monk later wrote of the event, "If I were Mike, I would have told them to buzz off and not played that night, to show them my worth. Instead, Mike didn't say a word and signed away millions of dollars as the three stood over him, lying on the floor. In all my years in the business, it was the most disgusting thing I ever saw," says Monk, still filled with revulsion as though it happened yesterday. They didn't just cut him off. They did it in the middle of one of their biggest records. He was the nicest guy in the world, and they didn't even let him get the benefit of that album. He lost millions. Millions! My stomach turned flips. In early 1985, while still a member of Van Halen, Roth released Crazy from the Heat record. Some months before Roth's departure, Noel Monk, their manager of 7 years, was fired suddenly by the Van Halen brothers. For 7 years, Noel Monk had managed a band on a month-to-month contract. They got greedy. Let's get rid of Noel and we'll get 20% more, says Monk. They even did a line audit for all 7 years, and to rub my nose in it, they made me pay for my share of that. Not a penny was out of place. According to Monk, Roth formally parted ways with his Van Halen bandmates in August 1985, taking with him 60 Van Halen employees, including Van Halen head of security Ed Anderson. Ted Templeman produced the first 2 David Lee Roth albums, Crazy from the Heat, 1985, and Eat 'em and Smile, 1986. Noel Monk passed away in 2022, 2 years after Eddie. Rest in peace. Eddie Van Halen was the richest member of the band. Websites say that he had a net worth of $100 million, but as we know, we can't trust those numbers. Anyway, in 2008, Eddie Van Halen sold former home, the single-story spot in Beverly Hills, for $1.5 million. It had 3 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms across 2,917 square feet of living space. In 2017, the property was for sale at $2.999 million, according to Los Angeles Times.